Hey guys, tonight we dive into something quietly unsettling. You've read the Bible, maybe heard it quoted 1,000 times, and yet there's something missing. Not in a conspiracy kind of way, but in a curious, linguistic, almost too obvious way. The word God, the big one, the one you'd expect to find stamped on every page, doesn't show up in the original Hebrew nearly as often as you'd think. In fact, it's not even the actual word they used. You might want to sit down for this, or better yet, lie down. This is one of those rabbit holes where your brain might start spinning, but softly, like a ceiling fan at 2 a.m. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Now, give them the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink at the page again. It's Psalm 23. Familiar, comforting, etched into memory. But when you glance at the interlinear Hebrew, the word God is nowhere to be seen. Instead, there's a peculiar cluster of letters, YHWH, or maybe in another verse, Elohim. The word God is like a ghost in these ancient texts, hovering, implied, but rarely stated the way we modern readers expect. And that realization stirs something. Like realizing your favorite movie was dubbed and the voice you thought was the main character's was never really theirs. In Hebrew, what we translate as God comes in flavors. There's Elohim, a word that feels cosmic, expansive, even mysterious. It's grammatically plural, but used with singular verbs, almost like it's trying to break grammar itself just to describe whatever this presence is. Kind of like saying, they walks, which makes no sense until you realize they isn't just a crowd, it's a single force wearing the clothes of many. You might chuckle imagining Moses scratching his head over verb conjugation, but really, it's ancient reverence taking linguistic form. This isn't to say the Bible doesn't talk about divinity, far from it, but what it does do is avoid giving us the easy out. The word God is like a comfortable catch-all, something tidy and boxed. Hebrew wasn't interested in tidy. Hebrew was interested in naming the unnameable, or more often, not naming it at all. And here's where things start to feel a little spooky. You begin to realize that much of what you thought the Bible said, it never literally said. It was filtered, translated, and adapted. Your modern Bible? A lovingly crafted remix. Scholars argue about how much is lost in that remix. Some say the multiplicity of names, Elohim, El Shaddai, Adonai, Yahweh, point to an evolving concept of God over centuries. Others claim it's less about evolution and more about perspective, how the divine appears in different lights, moments, and moods. Like a prism, one source, many reflections. And of course, there are those who suspect deeper edits. Some even theorize that the different names reflect different authors or theological schools subtly wrestling for control over the narrative. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time humans tried to box the infinite into a 3-syllable brand name. Still, it's worth wondering, what if the absence of God as a single monolithic word wasn't a flaw, but a feature? What if the Bible, in its ancient wisdom, was trying to tell you that the divine isn't a static noun, but a dynamic presence? One that defies labels, flips grammar, and appears in fire, cloud, whisper, wind. You picture an old scribe hunched over parchment, ink-stained fingers hesitating before each sacred name, choosing carefully, knowing that words can trap as much as they reveal. And just like that, your understanding shifts. The Bible wasn't written to make things simpler. It was written to invite you into mystery. Next time someone quotes a verse at you with the word God, you might find yourself mentally replacing it with silence, or a whisper, or maybe even a question mark.
You linger on that thought, letting it simmer. The absence of a single, definitive God in the text doesn't feel like a hole anymore. It feels like a door. A door into a worldview where language doesn't command the sacred, but trembles in its presence. And now you find yourself curious about that language, ancient Hebrew. It's not just old, it's layered, poetic, encoded, like someone took meaning and wove it into a tapestry where one thread can shimmer 100 different colors depending on the light. Take Elohim again. You're told it's plural and your grammar instincts flinch. But the more you sit with it, the more it makes sense. Not because it's multiple gods, though that's a juicy thought some scholars like to tease, but because it points to a fullness, a totality, a word that's trying to say this isn't just a being, it's being itself. You can almost hear the ancient voices debating, is Elohim the creator, the judge, the cosmic order? And someone in the corner whispers, yes. Then there's Yahweh, the name so sacred it was barely spoken. Just 4 letters, YHWH. A breath more than a word. Some say it sounds like inhaling and exhaling. Others say it's a verb, to be. Not a name, but a becoming. And you start to feel it. This isn't about theology. This is about intimacy, about reverence. The way a lover might avoid saying the name of the beloved out loud because it makes the moment too real. You imagine a temple courtyard, sunlight streaming through carved stone, a child reciting verses without daring to utter the name. Not out of fear, but respect. That shiver you get when you're too close to something ancient and vast. The ancient Hebrews didn't just speak of God, they circled around the idea. Like a campfire, too bright to stare into, but warm enough to sit beside. Then you stumble across a third word, El Shaddai, translated as God Almighty, but maybe, just maybe, it meant something more maternal. Some believe it comes from shad, the Hebrew word for breast. Suddenly, the image flips, not a thunder-wielding patriarch, but a nurturing force, protective, providing. You smirk. That's not in the Sunday school posters. But it makes you wonder, have we been mistranslating the divine all along? Rounding sharp edges, sanding down mystery, trading intimacy for authority? Translations, after all, are choices. And every choice hides something. There's even a word for this layered meaning, sod. It means secret or mystery. In Jewish tradition, it's the deepest level of interpretation, beneath the surface text, beneath even the moral and allegorical readings, down where words collapse and only the heart speaks. And here's a funny thing. The deeper you go into Hebrew, the less it feels like you're reading a book, and the more it feels like the book is reading you, exposing assumptions, challenging definitions, making you squirm in your comfy categories. You remember a professor once saying, the Hebrew Bible isn't interested in clarity, it's interested in awe. You chuckled at the time. Now you're not laughing. Because if God is just a placeholder in our English minds, then the real thing, the Hebrew heart of it, might be something too wild to tame, a storm, a whisper, a presence. And maybe that's why the original writers never pinned it down. Maybe they knew, name something too clearly and you start to control it, but leave it undefined and you have to wrestle with it. Like Jacob, remember him, wrestling all night in the dark with something he couldn't name, limping away at dawn but with a blessing. You wonder, maybe that's the point. Maybe faith isn't about understanding God. Maybe it's about being willing to wrestle in the dark and trust the blessing will come. Now you're walking through familiar verses, ones you memorized or heard 100 times in your childhood. Only they're different now. Genesis 1:1 doesn't just say, "In the beginning God created." No, in Hebrew it's Bereshit bara Elohim. And suddenly, you notice something. Elohim is the subject. That same strange, plural but singular word. You pause, looking up, as if the stars themselves are spelling it out across the ceiling of your room. There's no neat English equivalent for Elohim. It's a cosmic placeholder, the voice behind the void. And you get a small chill realizing that maybe this verse wasn't just describing an event, but a mystery, the act of becoming itself. And yet, when Moses meets the burning bush and asks for a name, what he gets is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I am that I am, or more enigmatically, I will be what I will be. You chuckle. That's not helpful at all, is it? But also, it kind of is. It's the most honest answer to a question we keep asking. Who is God? The ancient text isn't evasive, it's poetic. It invites mystery. Don't define me, it says, just follow. You're beginning to see how translation, despite its best intentions, flattens something rich and wild. You open your Old English Bible and thumb through the Psalms. Every Lord you read is Yahweh in disguise. Every God is either Elohim or El. You feel like a detective unmasking old friends. You remember Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd." It's soothing, yes, but if you whisper it in Hebrew, Yahweh Roi, it becomes something else, more intimate, less titled, more known. You glance at the footnotes, those polite, academic attempts to explain the unexplainable. Yahweh, the personal name of God, traditionally not spoken. You can almost hear the parchment crinkle as a scribe leans over his scroll, hesitating before writing the name, then replacing it with Adonai, the Lord, just to be safe. But not all scholars agree. Some argue that Yahweh might have been pronounced, might even have been common at one time. The pronunciation was lost, they say, or deliberately hidden. And here's where things get spicy. Because this isn't just a translation problem, it's a power problem. You've heard of the theory. The further translations get from the source, the more control certain groups gain over interpretation. It's not just language, it's gatekeeping. And suddenly, you're not just reading scripture, you're reading the history of how people managed meaning. Some scholars even suggest that early translators, like those behind the Septuagint or the King James, chose God and Lord, not just out of convenience, but to conform the text to Greco-Roman concepts of divinity. Concepts more familiar, more manageable, less wild. You imagine the original scribes groaning, "That's not what we meant." But the ink has long dried. Still, the ancient voices aren't silenced.
They hum beneath the English surface like a river beneath a frozen lake. If you listen closely, you can hear them. And now you're looking at the names themselves. El Elyon, El Olam, Adonai, Shaddai. Each one a facet, a glimpse, a metaphor, not a definition. Because if the Bible taught anything, it's that the divine doesn't sit still. It's in a cloud, in fire, in silence, in song, and yes, in paradox. You find yourself oddly comforted by the idea that God in the Bible isn't a person in the sky, but a presence that refuses to be pinned down. A whisper that changes shape as you grow older. A relationship more than a title. And maybe that's why the word God is so rare in the original text. Maybe the writers weren't being vague. They were being reverent, or poetic, or clever. Or maybe they just knew some truths are better sung than said, better hinted than shouted. You close the book, not because you found answers, but because your questions are finally humming in tune. And that, oddly enough, feels like faith.
You find yourself thinking back to that lecture you half slept through in college, something about semiotics and sacred language. At the time, you dismissed it as academic fluff. But now, here in the soft hush of your room, it clicks. Names aren't just labels, they're containers. And in Hebrew, every name of the divine is a vessel cracked just enough to let the mystery spill out. You turn back to the scroll of memory. There's this strange little detail in Exodus. The tetragrammaton, Yed-He-Vav-He, isn't even pronounceable in full. It's breath more than word. Some rabbis say it's the sound you make just by breathing in and out. Try it now. Inhale, exhale. You've just said the name. That kind of reframing stops you cold. What if every breath is a prayer? What if we've been whispering the divine since birth without realizing? But not everyone agrees, of course. Some scholars argue that the multiple names are just cultural artifacts, borrowed from surrounding polytheistic societies, gradually fused into one. The Israelites were monolatrist before they were monotheistic, you remember reading, meaning they worshipped one God but believed in many. Yahweh just happened to be theirs. Still, that view doesn't quite drain the mystery. It only makes it messier. And messiness, you're starting to see, might be the point. Because God, in English, is a clean word, sharp, capitalized, final. But the Hebrew names, they shimmer, they open, they invite participation. You recall how ancient scribes would intentionally leave gaps or write the name slightly smaller or larger than the surrounding text, tiny gestures that whispered, "Tread carefully." There's something thrilling about that, a text that resists being flattened, a language that dances just beyond your grasp. And now, you're wondering, what did it mean for translators to substitute all of that nuance with a single word? How much was lost in translation?
Picture a medieval monk hunched over a candlelit desk, faced with the challenge of bringing Hebrew poetry into Latin, then English. Would you choose accuracy or accessibility? Meaning or majesty? You suspect many of them opted for control, not out of malice, but practicality. The divine, in its raw form, is unmarketable. And yet, some tried. You remember reading about William Tyndale, who was executed for translating the Bible into English. His crime? Making the sacred accessible. He used Lord, yes, but also insisted on using love instead of charity, and congregation instead of church. Little choices, dangerous choices. And now you realize even the act of naming God is a battleground between precision and power, reverence and reach. You start mentally cataloging other cultures. In Islam, it's 99 names. In Hinduism, 1,000 forms. In indigenous traditions, God often shows up as nature itself. But in English-speaking Christianity, mostly just God. A word so overused it sometimes loses its gravity. But now you've glimpsed the alternative, and suddenly Psalm 19 feels alive. The heavens declare the glory of El, not God, not some boardroom deity, but El, primordial, ancient, thunderous. You imagine how it might feel to read the whole Bible in Hebrew, not for fluency, but for tone, texture. The way Ruach means both spirit and wind. The way Shema means to hear and to obey. Language matters. And you're beginning to see that the Bible wasn't written to be explained. It was written to be experienced. Which means maybe you've been approaching it all wrong. Maybe why doesn't the Bible mention God more often isn't the question. Maybe the better question is, what does it mean when it does? You whisper the names again: Elohim, Yahweh, El Shaddai, Adonai, Ehyeh. They don't line up neatly, but they don't have to. They're fingerprints, not blueprints. And tonight you feel the weight of them, not like a burden, like a door, slightly ajar. You're starting to sense a pattern, not in the names themselves, but in the way they're used. Like brush strokes in a painting you've been too close to appreciate. Step back a bit, and a design begins to emerge. Remember Genesis? In the beginning, Elohim created. But later, when God interacts with humanity, walking in the garden, calling out to Adam, it's Yahweh Elohim. Almost like the text is blending majesty and intimacy in a single breath. Creator and companion, cosmic architect and barefoot gardener. You smile. That duality tracks with your own experience of the divine. Distant one moment, disarmingly close the next. And the Bible doesn't stop there. Fast forward to Exodus, and it's Yahweh speaking from the burning bush. Not just speaking, introducing himself. I am that I am. Or more precisely, Ehyeh Aser Ehyeh. A phrase that resists translation as stubbornly as fire resists capture. Some scholars claim this was meant to signal God's ungraspability, an identity that is ever becoming. Others argue it's a deliberate wordplay, a wink from a God who says, "You'll know who I am by what I do." You imagine Moses blinking in the desert heat, trying to process this divine mic drop. You've been there. In different deserts, of course. Not Sinai, but long hours in quiet rooms, waiting for clarity. And what you got instead was presence. Not a sentence, a silence that hummed with possibility. It's no wonder, then, that when translators reached these moments, they opted for Lord in all caps. It was cleaner, safer, but what they tucked away in the margins, the footnotes, the glossaries, was that Lord was standing in for Yahweh, the breath name, the fire name. You picture a medieval scribe pausing before writing those letters, dipping the quill a second time, maybe whispering a prayer. The weight of ink never heavier. And then there's the New Testament. People think it abandoned Hebrew mystery for Greek clarity, but did it? Jesus doesn't often use God the way we might expect. He says Abba, Aramaic for father, yes, but more like Papa. There's warmth there, vulnerability, not a thundercloud deity, but someone you run to when you've scraped your knees. And then there's John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word. That's Logos, not God. A concept, an order, a living idea. So we circle back. Are we reading names or metaphors? Descriptions or disguises? Theologians still argue this point. Some insist the Bible uses many names for God because God is too vast for just one. Others say the multiplicity reveals a tension between traditions, North and South kingdoms, priestly versus prophetic voices, all layered together like spiritual palimpsests. You find that strangely comforting. The Bible isn't trying to be a tidy system. It's a conversation, a collection of stories trying to name the unnameable. And in that light, why doesn't the Bible mention God more often? Feels like the wrong question. The better question might be, what kind of God are we being invited to meet? Not a monolith, not a mascot, but something wild, personal, untranslatable. You breathe again, softly, just to hear the divine name echo through your lungs. And for the first time, that absence doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like an invitation. To listen differently, to speak more carefully, to find meaning not in a single word, but in the hush it leaves behind. You close your eyes now, not because you're tired, but because it somehow helps you hear better. A name you can't pronounce, a presence you can't define, a book full of words that gesture towards something bigger than language. You trace the pages of memory, how in Hebrew tradition, scribes would bathe before writing the divine name, not because the ink demanded it, but because the act of naming what cannot be named was a sacred risk. You feel that too. Somewhere along the way, people stopped writing the full name. They added vowels, made substitutions. Adonai, Hashem, the name, as if even proximity to it could burn. And maybe it can. It makes you wonder, what else have we replaced in translation? Not just in language, but in life. Have we flattened mystery for the sake of clarity, tamed the divine for easier access? The modern Bible, in all its languages, often relies on a single term, God. But now, having wandered through Yahweh and Elohim, Adonai and El Shaddai, you realize that term barely scratches the surface. Even God isn't the same across tongues. In Arabic, it's Allah. In Greek, it's Theos. In Latin, Deus. And each carries cultural layers, flavors of faith shaped by time and geography. You think about how different the word sounds on a child's lips versus a monk's whisper. The same word, but not the same weight. And yet, the silence between those words speaks volumes. That's where the Bible excels, in what it withholds, in what it dares to leave unnamed. You remember how in Jewish tradition, the name is never spoken aloud, that even in prayer, worshipers say Adonai in its place, reverence through restraint. You wonder if we've lost something in the noise, our endless talking about God instead of to God. You picture a cathedral lit only by candlelight, a single voice chanting a psalm, no amplification, no interpretation, just longing.
Is it possible that the Bible hides the word God in plain sight, not to obscure, but to deepen? You start to suspect that absence is its own kind of presence, like when someone you love walks out of a room and you still feel them there. Maybe the Bible invites us to feel God's name rather than simply read it, and that changes everything. You realize now why it matters. It's not about the frequency of a word, it's about the texture of encounter. The awe that arises when language pows out and mystery takes the lead. Theologians still debate, did the original authors intend all these layers? Or did the meanings accumulate like snow on ancient stones? It doesn't matter really. What matters is that you're here pondering this, in the quiet, in the dark, maybe with a candle lit, maybe just the glow of your screen reflecting in your eyes. And in that stillness, you feel it, the hum of something vast, unsayable, drawing near. You don't need the word God to know it's there, because now you understand. The most powerful names are the ones we dare not speak, but feel etched on our hearts like starlight.